Hey everyone, this is our botany introduction video. This is going to be covering pages 1 through 23 of Botany in a Day. So we can begin with that. So plants are all related, and this helps botanists group them into related groups because just like my sister and my brother might look more like me than somebody else, plants that are in the same family look similar. There are different groups that botanists use to categorize all organisms, and from most specific to least specific, these are the species, genus, family, order, and then you get less specific as you go up, all the way up to kingdom, which is the plant kingdom. Now, in those species, there's only one individual in that species. So you can think of Homo sapien. In the Homo genus, there's only sapiens. There's only one species within Homo sapien. At the genus level, there can be numerous different members of the genus. So to stick with our example, in Homo sapien, there are many different species that are under the umbrella of Homo. And then moving up from that, on the family level, you have an even broader categorization. So there can be many genus within the family, and then under those genus, many more species. So take, for example, the rose family. You have the rose family, and within that rose family, you have the rubus genus, and then within that rubus genus, you have specific types of blackberries or raspberries. So rubus is your blackberry and raspberry genus. Now we have common names that we use for plants, and we have scientific names. Common names can be things like blackberry or blueberry. One of the problems with using common names is that they can refer to a lot of different plants. So there's a tree called musselwood, which there are many different non-related trees within that, hornbeam and ironwood being two within that. And then also things like blueberries. There are many different kinds of blueberries, and they are within the Vaccinium genus. But within that genus, you have many different species. So there's very small, tiny blueberries that kind of wouldn't be worth your time to pick. And then you also have high bush blueberries, which have really large, juicy blueberries, which might be more worthwhile to pick. The scientific names are binomial. I went over this a little bit in the last video, but they have two names. So the first part of the binomial name is the genus, and the second part is the species. So we can take our blueberry example. So you have Vaccinium. Vaccinium is the genus, and then Vaccinium corymbosum would be high bush blueberry, and corymbosum is the species. So there's only one species within that binomial name. And these scientific names, they don't erase the common names, but they help us talk to each other and refer to a specific species, which really helps when you're talking across languages or across different regions or cultures that might have different names for different plants. Like I said before, the further we get from the species name, the less related plants get. So moving up from your species to your genus, plants within the same genus are less related than plants within the same family. Plants within the same family are less related than plants that are in the same order, and vice versa. The closer you get to the species level, the more closely related the plants get. One issue with the binomial names and this kind of way of naming plants is that our understanding of plant relationships and evolution is changing all the time. So as genetic testing is becoming more common and people are breaking down the genetics of all these different plants, we are having large recategorizations of plants. So now in the contiguous US, there are no native members of the aster genus. They have all been reclassified into Symphyotrichum. So that doesn't mean that we now have different plants here. It just means that we have our understanding of how these plants are related has changed. This can be really frustrating because you can spend so much time learning the Latin name of a plant, and then all of a sudden somebody publishes a paper and it's changed the name. But you can still use the old names. People refer back to them so that we can still historically know what plant has been referred to in historical documents. The next part of the book talks about plant evolution, and this is good to know just to kind of conceptualize how these plants are related within our Latin naming of them. Plants evolve from single-celled water-based plants. These kind of evolved into multi-celled plants, and these eventually started to inhabit coastlines, so kind of occupying the edge between land and water. These plants then co-evolved with fungi, which allowed the plants to pick up minerals that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So when they were floating in the ocean, they were just kind of floating in this nutrient-dense bath of water, and the minerals would just come to them. When they were on land, they couldn't quite do that, and fungi allowed them to harvest these minerals and use them. And in exchange for the minerals, plants gave these fungi carbohydrates. So they both had an interest in working together. This allowed plants to move further away from the ocean and colonize land. And then as these plants became larger, evaporation from the plant surface actually pulled water through the plant and pulled that mineral-rich substrate with it. So this kind of is the beginning of a vasculature system, or of kind of think of like straws throughout the plant. So if you have a straw and you're sucking on one end, you're kind of removing water from that one end, and water will come up the straw to replace that water moving. Evaporation is that same action, pulling water up. A little bit on lichens. So lichens are not quite a plant, not quite a fungus. They are a symbiotic relationship between a plant, a fungus, and a yeast. Sometimes instead of a plant, they are a cyanobacteria, fungus, and a yeast. When this book was written, we didn't know about the yeasts. That was a recent discovery. Somebody living in their trailer in Montana actually discovered that all lichen have a symbiotic relationship with yeasts. Now each one of those plant, fungi, and yeast can exist, I'm pretty sure, outside of that symbiotic relationship, but when they're all together, they can come together and form a lichen. If you want to read more about that, there's a really great chapter in Radical Mycology. Lichens are incredible, and I really hope that you check that out. Plants without a vascular system are not covered in this book. Those are your true mosses and hornworts and liverworts. These are plants that will only be found in very moist environments because they need that mineral bath of water kind of directly contacting their tissues, because they can't pull water and nutrients from anywhere else. Some of the earliest plants with a vascular system were spore producing. These spores would be released into the air, and then hopefully the spores would meet up and then be able to sexually reproduce outside of the plant. These include ferns, club mosses, and horsetails. Most ferns are inedible because they contain pyrrolizidine alkaloids, which are compounds that are toxic to the liver over long periods of time. And we didn't know about these as much because you had to look at larger population studies. So people used to be eating, well, people still do, but people would eat bracken and other kinds of fungi, but in these populations that ate lots of these ferns, they noticed that there were high rates of liver cancer and other liver issues. So you wouldn't get sick by eating one of them, but you would get sick over a long time by eating them over a long period of time. As far as I know, ostrich fern, which is, let me look that up quickly. Ostrich ferns are the only ferns that are edible and don't have those pyrrolizidine alkaloids in them. And they are Matukia struthiopteris. And you can find those around here. People are over harvesting them, but those are edible. You can definitely grow your own. I'm trying to propagate some downstairs right now. Club mosses don't have much edible use, but their spores are highly flammable, and they used to be used as flash bulbs for cameras. And if you want to take a lighter and kind of like shake the little spore, put the lighter there, you can have little sparks of flame. And that powder was also actually used as a powder for condoms and for diapers until they discovered that would cause penile cancer. So they don't use that anymore. Horsetails are used as mineralizing powders. So when herbalists want to give somebody a little extra mineral boost, they'll use that. Next in evolution came naked seeds, such as those found in conifers. These had the advantage of sexual reproduction happening in the protection of a cone or some other structure that's on the parent. Seed ferns are the first of these, but they're now extinct. Then came cycads and ginkgos, followed by conifers and flowering plants. Conifers produce separate pollen cones and egg cones. So the pollen cones are smaller, egg-containing cones are larger. Pollen is released on the wind, and then we'll find these egg cones, fertilize them, the seed will grow within the cone, and then eventually the seed will be released. After that came flowering plants about 130 million years ago. Flowers on these plants are actually just modified leaves that evolved to form sepals and petals. So sepals, think of this as a flower. Sepals are the parts on the outside. They tend to be green, but they can be other colors. And then the petals are the more colorful ones, more on the inside of the flower. In these plants, pollen lands on the tip of a pistil, and then this pollen fertilizes the ovule, the little egg, by burrowing down into the pistil. The pollen has two nuclei. One is for controlling the growth of that kind of burrowing, and the other is for actually transferring the genetic information to the ovule. The enclosed ovary within the pistil has enabled a lot of different forms of dispersal to evolve. So fruits, once there's that sexual reproduction, fruits are essentially just swollen ovaries that have evolved to be eaten with the seeds inside of them. Then an animal will carry that somewhere else, poop, and deposit that seed. Some ovaries build up pressure within the ovary and then fling the seeds out. So things like witch hazel and jewelweed, or seeds like nuts and grains have large amounts of fat and starch on them that make them attractive for animals to eat and distribute them in different ways. And rather than getting bogged down in all the terminology, I really like this description from the book. It's from, it is from Christopher Bird and Peter Tompkins in The Secret Life of Plants. It says, school children might have been fascinated to learn that each kernel on a cob in summer is a separate ovule, that each strand and on the pubic corn silk tufted around the cob is an individual vagina ready to suck up the pollen sperm brought to it on the wind, that it may wriggle the entire length of the stylized vagina to impregnate each kernel on the cob, that every single seed produced in the plant is a result of a separate impregnation. Instead of struggling with archaic nomenclature, teenagers might be interested to learn that each pollen grain impregnates but one womb, which contains but one seed, that a capsule of tobacco contains on average 2,500 seeds, which require 2,500 impregnations, all of which must be effected within a period of 24 hours in a space less than 1/16 of an inch of diameter. So I think that helps people become a little bit more interested in what's going on with this plant reproduction. Moving on from the flowering plants, then plants adapted with a colder climate. So as the global climate changed, some plants became deciduous, so they would lose their leaves in the fall, put all that energy into their roots, and then use that energy in the spring to come back again. We also have the distinction between monocots and dicots. There's also eudicots, but for the purposes of this class, we're only going to talk about monocots and dicots. So monocots, you can think of those as your grasses. Palms are also in that group. And these plants, they only have one leaf that comes out of their seed. Dicots have two. So mono means one, di means two. Monocots evolved from dicots. And monocots have one seed leaf, parallel veins. So if you look at a grass or a palm leaf, the veins in the leaves will not touch each other. Simple branching and floral parts mostly in three. So they would have 3 petals or 3 stamens or 9 or 6, any multiple of 3. Dicots have 2 seed leaves, netted veins. So if you look at the leaf of, say, a bean plant, there's a lot of veins that are kind of interacting with each other. Complex branching, so you can have a lot of different branches coming off instead of just one coming off here and there. And floral parts usually in 4s or 5s. So, 8 parts, 5 parts, 10 parts, that kind of thing. Flowers have evolved from simple to specialized. So simple flowers would be something like on a buttercup, where you'd have a lot of different flowering parts and they're all separate. Whereas you can also think of a lily, which doesn't seem to have a lot of different parts, but it has many parts within the same structure. So you have all the eggs in the ovule in one central spot, and then you have the pistil on top of that, and then you have the stamens, the male reproductive parts, for lack of a better word, all on the same flower with it all kind of combined together. And the extreme of this are the sunflower family plants, Asteraceae. And if you're looking at one sunflower head, you are actually looking at tens, if not hundreds, of flowers on one flower head. So that flower has not only created complex flowers, it's then brought multiple of those complex flowers together onto one head. Okay, so that was a lot of info. And I'm just going to quickly take us through the plant families that he listed. So there are a few more common plant families that we really want to focus on. And when we look at a plant, we want to ask ourselves a few questions. So one of the first questions that we'll ask is, are the leaves opposite or alternate? So are they coming off opposite each other, directly across each other on the stem, or alternate. One leaf here, one leaf there. How many petals are on the flower? If you have a plant that has 4 petals and 6 stamen, 2 of which are shorter than the other 4, you have a member of the broccoli family, or Brassica. And then how many pistils and stamens, so really counting the parts in that flower. And then other things like, are the leaves smooth? So is their edge smooth, or are they toothed? Are they jagged on the edges? Are the leaves compound or not? Are there many leaves coming off of one small leaflet, or is there just one leaf coming off of each thing? So questions like this can help us narrow down what we're looking at. And I'm going to pause there and then do a separate video on some of the plant families that we're going to look at. We're going to look at these in more detail later, but we'll stop this for now so that you don't get overwhelmed. So check back and we'll have another video looking at the plant families, and then we'll do another one with the other plant families we're going to read about this week.